it's made so that the cows can't move, and they feed them newspapers and all this stuff. Cows should be out there eating grass. That's what cows should eat. If you're going to eat beef, you should be eating beef where cows have eaten grass. It's not even healthy for them to eat corn.
I did a whole piece on world farming a couple of months ago, and it was really astonishing. It is astonishing how animals are treated prior to slaughter, let alone during
There are a lot
slaughter.
of statistics about vegan and vegetarian diets versus carnivores, but I don't know of any studies that show if you allow animals to eat what animals would normally eat and to be out out more in the wild, like cows eating grass or chickens eating grubs and insects and stuff, how healthy that is. Because basically the studies are showing cows eating unnatural things that are subsidized,
Right.
not what they should be eating. And it makes a difference in the quality of their meat and how it works for humans. So cows that eat lots of corn don't have the same kind of immune system, so they have to get more antibiotics, which end up in the meat.
I did a whole piece on that too. It's frightening, actually, and it's sad.
Well, I don't think humans should be eating whales or dolphins flat out, and the vast majority of humans agree. So I don't know why the Japanese think that they're especially able to have something that's poisonous. It makes no sense. And it's this whole thing about cultural things. Well, it's culturally America's place to be number one in the world, and it's culturally our place to win battles. So therefore, should we go and attack the rest of the world, and because to stay the biggest, should we take their oil? Does that make sense? I mean, you can take this cultural thing in any direction you want, but it leads to war. It leads to conflict. It leads to death. It leads to deficits. It doesn't lead to the same place that acting with the will of the world and completing things so that no one is whaling. So we're all on the level playing field. Nobody's whaling.
Did you hear about the new trade agreement between Japan and Canada to bring seal meat to Japan?
Between Canada and China.
Canada and China. Sorry about that.
All right. Yeah,
What
I
do you
did
think
hear
about
about it,
that?
and I think that, well, I said on Facebook something that upset at least one Chinese person, which I'm happy to repeat and upset any Chinese listeners, and that is that baby seal meat is the most similar to human meat, and I think it's really dangerous to give anybody, especially the Chinese who will eat anything, a greater appetite for what amounts to human flesh. Baby seals can't swim when they're born, and 300,000 of them are clubbed to death each year. I mean, they have no chance of getting away. And it's not like they're farmers raising these things and putting in money. Basically, just guys are going out and into what amount to parks and clubbing baby seals to death. And the idea that Chinese would be eating that, to me, it's very sad.
What made you write Reconciliation, 78 Reasons to End the U.S. Embargo of Cuba?
Well, a variety of things. For one thing, I like the idea of jobs, and I wanted to do an experiment and see if people really wanted jobs and really wanted economic growth in America, because that's my focus. I want jobs, I want economic growth. Now, here's the funny thing. With the Federal Reserve created $10 trillion and stuck it on America's balance sheet, and they sent $3.3 trillion to corporations and abroad. And they're saying, oh, this is all part of stimulus, we need the stimulus. The irony is that if you took off the embargo with no money, that you could have had just as much economic growth over time as all of the growth in the United States last year. So, and even more than in 2009. So in other words, an entire year's worth of U.S. GDP growth could be done just from the Cuba embargo. It is the number one thing that the U.S. can do at no cost to itself to actually make $1 trillion for the United States. And it just shows me that if we go down, if we have a financial, downgrade of our debt, if we have a runaway inflation, if we have unemployment, it's because we chose to not care about people having jobs, not care about farmers selling their products, and not for any real reason. It's just because of what's called state capture. You have a group of people who can grab control of one particular mechanism of government and stay in control of that mechanism. So with respect to U.S. foreign policy in Cuba, it's been captured by Miami Cubans. And my own feeling is that their goal is to go back and own Cuba and run it. And part of the reason that you want to own Cuba is that it's got $3 trillion worth of oil. Cuba has 20 billion barrels of oil, just like the United States. Cuba has as much oil left as the U.S. So, of course, you'd want to take over Cuba and grab it like there's a statement from Hitler about Switzerland. Diese kleine Stachelschwein, ich peck ihm beim Heimweh ein, meaning the little hedgehog, I'm going to put him in my pocket on the way home. So the Miami Cubans go, okay, so Castro stole our farms and stuff, screw us? No, screw you, man. We're going to go over and we're going to turn the United States government, we're going to grab hold of it. We're going to do something United States candidates want. We're going to grab hold of it, and we're going to put the pressure on you and not let you grow and develop until we can come back and take over again. However, it costs the United States money, and it costs Florida money. So to me, the least intelligent voters in the country are Florida voters. Why? Because they have one of the worst mortgage default rates in America. You have all these people with these mortgage problems, and it's because a lot of people can't afford their homes. Well, guess what? If you didn't have an embargo of Cuba, if you just lifted it, you would have an extra 200,000 jobs. That's my number. Other university numbers have said 60 or 70,000. Most of those would be in Miami-Dade County. So you would pretty much end the housing crisis. It would be like, what if Nevada tried to embargo both Arizona and California and only do business there and not allow people to come and gamble? Well, okay, then Nevada would screw itself. Well, that's what Florida voters have done. Now, the irony is that a majority of people in the United States want normalization of relations with Cuba. But here's the surprising thing. The majority of people in Florida want normalization of relations. The majority of people in Miami-Dade County want normalization of relations. And even the number of Cuban Americans in Miami-Dade County want normalization. So we're not talking about democracy. We're talking about people with conflicts of interest commercially who want to make money by making the United States, I call this a pariah policy, because the vote at the UN last year was 187 to 2. The entire world, every single country in Latin America, every country in Africa, every country in Europe, and every country in Asia, unless you count Israel, was against the United States without exception, without one single exception. Not one NATO member voted with the U.S. Now, you can't tell me that the United States is the world leader and that the President of the United States is the leader of the free world or of any world or the most powerful man in the world when every single nation in the world but Israel votes against you on a policy, on a matter of principle that the United States has held for 50 years. Last October 20th is the 50-year anniversary of the U.S. embargo of Cuba. It has accomplished nothing but cost the United States over $1 trillion. It's accomplished nothing. And I can say, and I know that this will be controversial, I have no doubt that Fidel Castro wants the embargo for the simple reason that I was told that he looked at my book, because I let the Cuban government have a look at the book, and they have made no announcements about it. They've done nothing to put forward the argument. And to me, the book is too good. It's too effective. It makes the case too powerfully for lifting the embargo. So I don't see any evidence the Cuban government wants to lift the embargo.
I have a question. I have a question about that.
I'm talking about the leaders of Cuba, which is Fidel and Raul Castro.
I have a question about that. Do you think that perhaps the IMF, which goes in and takes over countries, has a deal with Fidel Castro behind the scenes to have access into the country and have its way, but it's not necessarily available to just anybody in commerce?
No, I don't think the IMF has a deal with Cuba at all. The IMF and the World Bank treat Cuba terribly. Cuba is treated horrifically by these supposedly multilateral organizations, and it just exposes that they're hand puppets for the United States. And when I say the United States, I don't really mean the United States, because the will of the people, if you actually looked at, I look at a couple things. One, what do the majority of people want? Okay, so you better have a really, really good argument for doing something that very few of the people want. Number two, what does the Constitution say? Are you abiding by the Constitution? And in the case of the Cuba embargo, it clearly violates the First, Fifth, and 14th Amendments. Like, why should people who come from Cuba get accelerated citizenship? The 14th Amendment says you're not supposed to treat one group differently than another.
What is it about?
Well, it's about making money. I mean, look at Radio Marti and TV Marti. $500 billion to beam propaganda at Cuba that no Cuban has ever... I've never met a Cuban who saw TV Marti. There are people who've heard Radio Marti, but $500 billion for those organizations. But they use that money to buy time in Miami. So you basically have U.S. taxpayer money being used to create programming that's shown in Miami. Why? Where is that in the Constitution? Where in the